why do children resist parents from the toddler years to the teenage years? So let's face it, it starts from when they're little, and it can go on until the teenage years. So sometimes it gets better, but sometimes it can get worse. So what are those underlying factors that are causing children's resistance most of the times? And I want to be upfront with you. I thought about this information, and I really wanted you to be aware of it if you're not already aware of it, because I really wish I knew this when my children were toddlers. Because my first one, when he became a toddler around 18, 24 months, that's also when I had my second one. So there was a lot of factors going on there, but I started seeing the resistance. I always share with him that you turn from a very calm baby and suddenly saying no and resisting everything overnight. So I know a lot of you experience that with your children, that at some point, somehow something happens and bang, you're like, oh, I don't recognize you anymore. What is happening right now? So if I knew this information that I'm going to share with you in a moment, I know that I would have handled things so in a such different way than I did. So just hearing the word no sometimes can be a trigger for a lot of us, right? When we are constantly being bombarded by no, 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 at times, and perhaps sometimes, like, we get triggered right away when we hear that word no. So I'm going to ask you, if you have even older children yourself, do you remember the times when your child first said no to everything, or did the opposite of what you wanted them to do all the time? Do you remember those times if your children are a little bit older? So what is really happening with our children when they are going through that stage? So it starts with the stage of the terrible twos. We are all familiar with this expression, right? The terrible twos is when things start to shift. That's when we start to see more resistance. That's when we're being bombarded with, no, I don't want to do this. And if we don't allow them to say their no, then it can end up in a tantrum, a meltdown, and so on. And so how did you respond to your child when they were going through that initial phase, when they were really little, when they started to say no? Did you allow them to say no sometimes, or did you push back, or do you get very frustrated if you're going through it right now? Just recognizing for you what goes on for you as a parent when you're seeing your child going through that phase or starting that phase of saying no and resisting. So when our children go through this phase, and it starts around 18, 24 months, right? When this starts to say no. And knowing that around that age, that's when they start to speak as well. So when they are starting to say no, and it's not just me, it's not just you, for that matter, all children go through this phase. So therefore, it shows us that it's not just our own child that's, just being defiant in the moment or not wanting to listen to us. What it indicates is that there is a development going on within our children from 18 months when they are starting to say no to us. So it is the fascinating journey of a toddler to adult willpower. This is a journey when a child as young as 2 years old starts to be able to develop their willpower. They start to develop their own sense of themselves, their own will, their own preferences, and their ability to make choices depending on what they like or what they don't like, and being able to say it and express it. So when the child enters this very evolutionary stage and resists adults, there's actually a name for it. And the name, if you're familiar with that name, you can put it in the thread if you know. Thank you, Jessica, for joining me here and having you in the community. And I know you're tuning in from, let me see here, I can't read the whole comment. Let me see. Thank you, Jessica. So from East Sandwich and then the rest, I'm assuming it's Massachusetts that you're tuning in from. So thank you for joining me. So yes, there is a name for that if you don't know. And the name for that resistance is called a counter will, right? So a child from 18 to 24 months in their own development starts to develop willpower. But in order to develop willpower to be themselves, they do what we call the counter will. So the counter will is that automatic resistance to any sense of physical or emotional pressure that happens that we feel as humans. So if I ask you, if somebody push against you today, what will be your reaction? Usually you will push back, right, to protect yourself. And this is the same for a child. When a child says no, that's their counter will. It's their protection against somebody else's will, usually a parent, usually a caregiver. And as a parent and a caregiver, physically, we're much bigger than them. And we also are there to protect them and to guide them. So usually we are the people that they feel the safest with. And so when they know that we are the people that they are the safest with, in that development stage, they will practice their counter will, right? So the child is learning about what she or he wants, but not about what just the parents wants, right? So that counter will is what helps our children to develop their willpower, to become their own. And it's their ability to say no, right? Before they can even learn to say yes. That's why for every toddlers who starts to speak, do they say yes first or do they say no first? What has been your experience? Usually we'll hear them say no most of the time. So perhaps, for yourself, are you able to say no at times? Or do you have difficulty saying no? Or do you know somebody who has difficulty saying no a lot of times? So knowing that, why is that? Why do people as adults sometimes can easily say no? And why some adults have difficulty saying no or are not able to say no for that matter? And a lot of times it's like, how did we develop as a child? What was our experience? Because if we can't say no, then the yes usually doesn't mean anything, right? And so knowing that for yourself, maybe having some reflection, in which group are you? Are you someone who can easily say no to others? Or do you have difficulty saying no? And if you do have difficulty saying no, maybe having some reflection upon why do I have a challenging time saying no? So let's move on to the next part of this is what contributes to more no's? What makes the counter will get bigger and bigger and bigger at times? So that same concept, when I push against you, you're going to push back. If I push harder, most likely you're going to push back harder. So same thing for our children. When they are being pushed too hard, the harder they will push back. And the stronger that counter will become. You all know the expression, what we resist persists. So if we are resisting their counter will, we're going to see them push back even more. And how do they see us pushing hard against them? If whenever they say no to us, we resist them and we give them either a consequence or we punish. In those cases, a child then feels more powerless and more helpless. And know that it's in their development stage that they're saying no. It's normal for them around the toddler years to start saying no to us. But if we don't let them say no at times and we resist it, that's when they can't allow that counter will to develop into a willpower eventually. So they get the pushback from us. And obviously, when they get the pushback from us, there may be their attachment needs that are being threatened. If we are getting angry at them, if we are giving them like punishments for saying no, they will eventually feel like they can't practice their counter will. Hopefully that's making sense to you. You can let me know in the thread if you're listening on replay as well, if that's making sense. If not, put in your questions and I'll be happy to answer them. So for example, if parents, punish and the child feels powerless, let's take an example. If a child is raised by very strict parents, and no matter what, they have to abide by their parents' will all the time. So they're not able to say no because they know if they say no, there could be a punishment, there'll be a consequence attached to that is not going to be good for them. They eventually will let that go. So they will not say no. But what may happen later on, because it is part of our development to exert willpower, to be able to be ourselves, to be able to say what we want, say what we don't want, and being able to say no, then inherently it will show up again. And that's why maybe later on as a teenager, you will get more resistance from this child, or even that may continue in adulthood, right? So there's a inherent sense of wanting to develop that willpower, but because it didn't have the ability to develop from the toddler years and as a child grew up, then later on it would come on full force. You may know already someone who is in automatic opposition all the time, and they're always resisting you. Right? You may know an adult who is always saying no, no matter what, whatever you ask, it's always a no, no, no all the time, or they are always kind of being defiant. So know this, when a child's counter will does not develop, either because they were not allowed to say no, because they fear punishment, or perhaps the child did not have a trustworthy caregiver or parent that they could practice saying no to. For whatever reason, this caregiver or parent wasn't available to them. Then what can happen later on is, one, you may see this out of control counter will that can stay until adulthood, which, nowadays, we may be calling this as a child being oppositional, defiant, right? And we've already labeled that you can see this automatic, out of control resistance happening all the time. Or it can go to the opposite. So instead of being defiant, what the child may resolve to is being very compliant. So instead, when they were trying to exert their no and they couldn't, either because there was not a trustworthy parent or caregiver, or it came with some dire consequences, then they learn to do the opposite, meaning they become very compliant. And you know people like this who can't say no to anything, who needs other people's approval, who puts other people's needs above of their needs all the time, right? So let me know if you know people like this, that, you know, that you recognize that trait in them. So in either case, the sense of self, the sense of will, the authentic self does not develop because of the conditions, right? So what are the conditions? Did the child feel that they could say no at times, or was their no's always met with more resistance and with punishment, with consequences? So our willpower is what enables us to become independent, what helps us to be self-regulated, self-motivated, and being able to engage socially as humans. And isn't that what we want for our children? We want them to become independent. We want them to be regulated, being self-motivated, being able to be themselves, do what they love the most in their life, and being able to engage and connect with others. So many adults, you know, as we know, have very strong counter will. You know, you already mentioned you may know people like this. It's because they were not in an environment where their counter will was able to develop into willpower. So it's a very important thing to understand that when our toddlers or children a little bit older are starting to say no to us, when they don't like something, they tell you to not take this personally. And I will touch on that while we may be taking this personally as well. But if we can look at it that it's part of their development and that it is important for them to be able to say no at times to us, to communicate that to us, because eventually as an adult, when they grow up, we want them to know who they are, what they want, and what they want to do, and to be able to say no when things are not aligned with them. And we know for ourselves as adults, as parents, when something is not aligned, we want to have the capacity to stand up for ourselves, to stand up for our children, to make those decisions that feel good for ourselves. But when an adult did not grow up with that ability for their counter will to evolve into their own willpower, you may see them act and react just like children and in a very immature way. And that's a byproduct of most of the time that their willpower, their counter will wasn't able to develop when they were little. So what to do about it that can help us and our children when our kids are going through that stage of development? Especially, I know for us as parents, when we get hit with it, when they're toddlers, it's like a shock, right? We're like, what is happening? And sometimes if it's very triggering for us, we're not able to stay calm, and that's when we react. So what helps to curtail a child's counter will while allowing that counter will to develop within its own evolutionary boundaries is when a child can have a trusting relationship with a parent or with a caregiver. So cannot emphasize enough that a trusting relationship is what's going to allow that counter will to develop. So when a child feels that he or she has the ability to make choices, then the child will let go of their opposition, of resisting all the time. So during that phase of development, what we can do as parents is to give them opportunities to make their own choices, to be able to say no, right? So, and this is where you need to pick your battle here. So you can give them choices throughout the day. There are plenty of times you can give them choices about what food do you want to have at lunchtime? Do you want to have a sandwich or do you want to have soup? Clothing, what would you like to wear to go to the party? You want to wear this or you want to wear that? What games do you want to play? Do you want to play a board game right now or you want to go outside and shoot some hoops? So into our daily lives, we can give our children these simple choices where they feel, I have the ability to say no. No, I don't want the sandwich. Yes, I want the pizza. No, I don't want to go play outside. Yes, I want to play a board game right now. Right? So while you give them that opportunity to say no at times, then we allow them to develop the counter will. Right? And I say choose your battle because if you know at dinner time, it's going to be very busy because there are activities and so on. So today, I'm not cooking anything else. So we're eating leftovers. So there's not going to be a choice about what you're going to eat tonight. If that's what you know is going to happen, then give the opportunity during the day for your child to make other choices. Right? So the more they can start to make their own choices, the more you give their counter will the ability to evolve and develop. And then they are also developing their own willpower. Not sure if that's making sense to you. Again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll be happy to answer your questions. It's always, you'll learn more if you ask me questions as I go along than if you're just listening a lot of times. So if you're with me today, say hello. I'm not going to bite you, and put your questions in the chat right now. And the more you engage, also, the more people can see those lives, and maybe it can help other parents as well. If you're finding this important right now, this information that I'm sharing, finding it valuable. So choose your battle, give plenty of options for your child to make choices. Another thing is to keep your words, so how we communicate, right? Keeping our words, meaning if we say something that we follow through with it. Children are always hearing us, watching us. So it's important. That's how we build trust, right? What we say we're going to do, we keep our words. And if we can't do it for whatever reason, then we explain that to the child, but we just don't not do it. Communicate and give plenty of time for your child to finish playing or getting ready for bed. So a lot of time the resistance happens when our children are little, is when they're playing and we say, you need to finish now. Give them plenty of time. So about 20 minutes, give them a warning that's the play is coming to an end, or they need to go get ready for bed. If they're playing video games, that video game time is almost over. So it's not just a sudden, abrupt stop. We know that children, that doesn't register well with them. And even for us, if we're enjoying something and we have to stop right away and somebody's coming and says stop, it doesn't land well with us. So creating that sense of safety, that sense of understanding with our children, and so that they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel understood. And then the more they're going to cooperate. So even this attachment needs to come into play when we communicating with them. So the more their own attachment needs are met, then the more they will listen also and be willing, be open to what we are saying and what we're maybe suggesting, or even the choices we're giving them. And another thing about choices, you want to give choices within the safety boundaries. So I'm not saying that you're going to let your child do whatever, whenever, but as a parent, you're going to make a decision of what is your boundary of safety, what is aligned with your values, and give them choices based on boundaries, safety, and values with whatever choices you're giving them as they are growing up as well. That changed. Also recognize when we are triggered by our child's counter will. So when our child is saying no, resisting, or doing the complete opposite, become aware when we are getting triggered by this. Because if we're getting triggered and we become dysregulated ourselves, and then we're pushing back against their counter will, guess what? They're going to push back as well. And then it becomes a big conflict, and it's very messy, and it's not something enjoyable. That's not something we want to happen. So recognize that when it's happening within ourselves, when we're getting upset about whatever our children are doing, that it may be their counter will at play, right? So noticing the pressure you feel when you're pushing back yourself, which then you're seeing that reflection of the child's counter will. So being able to pause, breathe, and come back and regulate before you interact with your child, right? If you have a hard time with that, this is what I help my clients with, and that's what I'm good at, helping you manage those triggers so that you don't become dysregulated yourself. Or if you are dysregulated, how do you bring yourself back to being grounded? Another thing is to do the repair work. If the attachment was broken for whatever reason between you and your child, and it happens all the time, and it's not a reflection of you as a parent, it happens all the time for all of us. But doing that repair work is important, again, to rebuild the trust with your child, because it's very important as our child goes through that developmental stage that there is trust with us. Not only that they feel that they can practice their counter will, but that they can feel that they can trust us enough to practice that counter will, right? To show them that they're safe with us. Nurturing relationship is actually what mitigates counter will. When we are in a relationship, when we have a bond with our children and they feel the bond with us, they will practice their counter will, but there's less likely that that counter will is going to get bigger and bigger. If they feel the bond with us, they feel that we see them, we hear them, we understand them, and they feel safe with us, and they feel understood by us as they're going through that stage. Remember, it is inherent. It is something that's happening in the physiology. It's not something that they are choosing intentionally to say no all the time, right? So if we can remember, this is what is truly happening. And why does it get bigger and bigger is when they're not able to do it in a healthy way, if it's always met with more resistance from us. Also notice if you're becoming defiant yourself, why are you becoming defiant? Why do we have a need to push back? And it all has to do, again, with what do we make this mean when we see our child saying no and doing the opposite of what we want? There's a meaning that we're putting to it that's bringing up this opposition in us, right? So addressing that for us is very important. Like if we notice that we are becoming defiant ourselves, that we're pushing back a lot, because what will that contribute to? You'll have more difficulty handling your child's counter will. And that counter will may get bigger. And then it's like a vicious circle. As it gets bigger, you have more challenges. And as you have more challenges, you push back more, and so on and so forth. So very important to ask ourselves, why is this so upsetting to me? Because everything that upsets us comes from a belief, or perceptions, from thoughts, from habits, and that we can change. And most likely the perceptions and the beliefs, we've learned it. And so we can change that. And so just by shifting your mindset, your perspective of when a child is saying no all the time, what is really going on, this by itself now, if you have this level of awareness that, would you respond the same way you've been responding? Maybe not. I know for me, if I knew this, I wouldn't have responded the same way. I wouldn't get so angry about it. I wouldn't make it so personal, right? And so just shifting that perspective perhaps will help you now see your child when they're saying no all the time, to understanding, okay, they're saying no to me. Maybe they don't like what I'm saying. Maybe they don't like the way we do things. Can we have a conversation about it? And if they're a little bit older, of course, we can have a conversation about it. But even when they're younger, can we communicate with each other? Can we see them, hear them? Can we help them? Can we give them choices throughout their days so they feel like, yes, I can say no. And when they can say no, when they have an experience with other kids at school, something they don't like, guess what? They'll be able to say no. But if they don't develop that counter will they say no? Or will they just go along and then become a victim, perhaps, of bullying or whatever else is going on nowadays that is going up the roof? We are seeing more and more of that. So counter will is a good thing. It's helping children develop their willpower. And Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who wrote the book, Hold On to Your Kids, it was skipping me for a moment, talks extensively in that book about our children's counter will. So know that it is not just you who is experiencing it. All parents experience it, and it's a normal developmental stage for our kids to exert their counter will so they can develop their willpower. So if that resonates with you, practice showing up differently and addressing that differently, and let me know how that works for you. If you're very defiant and you find it very challenging with your kids when they are saying no, when they are not going along with what you're saying, and you've tried, then reach out to me or reach out to somebody else. There's help out there. You don't need to suffer as a parent, and you don't need to jeopardize your relationship with your children. So if you feel like you need help with all of this and something needs to change in your relationship with your child, do it now. Don't wait later, because later becomes more difficult when your child is older. When they become a teenager, it's much harder than to work with them than when they're younger. That I can tell you, because I already have one teenager in the house, and a second one is almost becoming a teenager. And so it gets harder. Address it now, and this work that you can do on yourself to understand yourself better so you can show up with your kids better, so you can regulate. And the more regulated you are, the more regulated your kids will be as well. This work can be done by anyone, by any parents. I know that because I've worked with many parents. I've also worked on, not me work on myself. I did do this work with somebody else, and it's the best thing that I've ever done in my parenting journey. And this work doesn't have to take long. It can take just a few months for you to really understand what is at play, right? It's not our children. Our children, they want attachment with us. They're not intentionally getting up every day and saying, I want to disrupt the relationship with my parent. It's actually the opposite. So even when they're saying no, it's not because they're saying no because they want to be, a pain in the butt for us. No, they actually want the opposite. And because it's a developmental stage that they need to say no, but if we can't handle their no's, then it's not them. It's something going on with us. And we can do something about that. And, by now I know all parents at one point or another, we have to look within because that's the only thing we can do. We can't control our kids. They're going to grow up. They're going to be their own. But if we want that relationship with them and we want to be there for them, we want to allow them to be who they are and to express themselves in this world, then it's our responsibility to understand ourselves better so we can understand them better. And not only them, but everybody else around us. Okay, so if you're feeling called to do this work, I mentioned at the beginning of this live that we have a birthday coming up in the family. And with that birthday, I really want to celebrate with other parents. So we're going to have a promo week. If you are curious about the work that I do that maybe can help you, it's not for everyone. I understand that. I'm not pressuring, I'm not forcing, but I'm offering. If that resonates with you, then reach out to me and take advantage of the promo week when we put the information out there. Or you may just simply reach out to see if it is for you. Sometimes it's not. So we're just going to have a chat and see if I can help you or not. So thank you for listening. Let me know if there's anything else that you have questions about what I've shared today or about something else. Let me know, put it in the thread, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. I don't see any more questions here, but if you do have questions, put them in the thread and I will come back and answer your questions. I'm just going to wait just a little bit longer. Sometimes your comments doesn't show up until a little bit later. But I invite you to put in some comments or anything if it was valuable to you today. Your feedback is valuable to me. I'm spending my time and I want to share things that are valuable to you. So your time is being used as well in a good way, that you're learning something that's going to help you on your own parenting journey. So please let me know if what I'm sharing with you is valuable or not, and so I can address for the future lives. So take care, everyone. Thank you for being here with me. Have a great day, morning, evening, wherever you are, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.